I got a voicemail from my brother Cameron at 2:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in October, and that should have been completely impossible because I'd watched them lower his casket into the ground exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days earlier. I know the exact count because I've marked every single day on a calendar app on my phone, watching the number grow, watching time put distance between me and the worst day of my life. Some people try to forget trauma. I couldn't stop counting it. My name is Luke Morrison. I'm 42 years old, and before that voicemail arrived, I thought I had my life figured out. I run a construction company in Portland, Oregon, Morrison & Sons. Even though I only have one son, and he's 12 years old and more interested in video games than learning how to frame a house. I've got a wife named Rachel who I've been married to for 15 years. We have 2 kids, Tyler who's 12 and Emma who's 9. We live in a 4-bedroom Craftsman in southeast Portland that I renovated myself, taking it from a condemned teardown to something featured in Portland Monthly magazine. On paper, I'm successful. On paper, I'm living the American dream. But here's what the paper doesn't show. Here's what nobody sees when they look at my perfect house and my successful business and my beautiful family. I'm haunted. Every single day for the last 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days, I've been haunted by the brother I lost and the guilt that came with losing him. Cameron was my younger brother by 5 years, which made him 37 when he died. When I thought he died, when I stood at his funeral and gave a eulogy that made grown men cry and talked about what an incredible person he was, how he'd touched so many lives, how the world was darker without his light in it. I meant every word. Cameron was one of those people who made everyone around him better just by existing. He was a high school English teacher at Lincoln High, and his students didn't just respect him, they loved him. They wrote him letters years after graduation. They invited him to their weddings. 3 of them spoke at his funeral, barely able to get words out through their tears. He was also gay, and in our family, that was complicated. Our father, Richard Morrison, was old-school Portland conservative, the kind of man who thought the city had been ruined by California transplants and liberal politics. When Cameron came out at 23, Dad didn't disown him exactly, but he made it clear that he didn't approve. There were a lot of tense family dinners, a lot of passive-aggressive comments about lifestyle choices and disappointment. Mom tried to keep the peace, but she always deferred to Dad. That was just how their marriage worked. I should have stood up for Cameron more than I did. I should have told Dad to shut up, that Cameron's sexuality was none of his business, that love was love, and our brother's happiness was more important than Dad's outdated prejudices. But I didn't. I stayed quiet during those dinners. I changed the subject when things got heated. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but really, I was just being a coward. I was protecting my relationship with Dad because he'd helped me start my business, because he'd given me the down payment on my first house, because I was afraid that standing up for Cameron would mean losing those advantages. Cameron never held it against me. That was the worst part. He never made me feel guilty for my silence. He just accepted it, the way he accepted everything, with that gentle resignation that made you want to be better than you were. Every Sunday morning at 9 a.m., without fail, my phone would ring and it would be Cameron. We'd talk for an hour about everything and nothing. He'd tell me about his students, about the books he was reading, about his boyfriend Marcus and their plans to maybe adopt a kid someday. I'd tell him about construction projects and Tyler's Little League games and the mundane details of family life. Those calls were the best part of my week. I looked forward to them the way some people look forward to church or therapy or their favorite TV show. Cameron had a way of making you feel heard, really heard, like every word you said mattered to him. He'd remember details from conversations we'd had months ago, would ask follow-up questions that showed he'd actually been listening. In a world where everyone's half paying attention while scrolling their phones, Cameron gave you his full presence. It was a gift. 3 years ago, on a Sunday morning in August, my phone didn't ring at 9 a.m. I noticed around 9:30, thought it was weird but not alarming. Cameron had probably slept in or gotten busy with something. I texted him, "You alive? Missed my weekly therapy session." He didn't respond. By noon, I was starting to worry. Cameron always responded to texts, usually within minutes. I called him, straight to voicemail. I called Marcus, also voicemail. By Monday afternoon, I'd driven to their apartment in the Pearl District. They rented a small 1-bedroom on the 8th floor of a converted warehouse building, the kind of place with exposed brick and industrial fixtures that cost way too much for what you got. I had a key that Cameron had given me for emergencies. I let myself in, calling their names, expecting to find them sick with food poisoning or passed out with hangovers from a weekend party. The apartment was empty, but not normal empty, wrong empty. Cameron's phone was on the kitchen counter, plugged into the charger, which was weird because Cameron never went anywhere without his phone. Marcus's wallet was on the entry table. Both of their laptops were still there. The coffee maker was still on. A full pot of coffee burned down to tar-like sludge. 2 mugs sat on the counter, still half full of coffee that had long since gone cold. Everything about the scene screamed interruption. Like they'd been having a normal Sunday morning, and something had happened that made them leave immediately, without grabbing their phones or wallets or any of the things you'd normally take. I called the police. The officer who showed up was a 20-something kid who looked like he'd graduated from the academy about 15 minutes ago. He took a statement, looked around the apartment, and told me that adults have the right to leave whenever they want, that there was no sign of forced entry or struggle, that I should wait 48 hours before filing a missing persons report. People take spontaneous trips, he said. Maybe they needed a break from their phones. I knew Cameron. He wouldn't just disappear without telling anyone. He wouldn't leave his phone behind. He wouldn't miss work without calling in. He was in the middle of teaching summer school, had 15 kids counting on him to help them pass English so they could graduate on time. But I waited the 48 hours like the officer suggested. And then I filed the missing persons report. And then began the worst week of my life, the week of not knowing, of calling hospitals and checking homeless shelters and putting up flyers with their photos all over Portland. Have you seen these men? Cameron Morrison, 37, 6 feet 1 inch, brown hair, green eyes. Marcus Chun, 35, 5 feet 10 inches, black hair, brown eyes. Last seen Sunday, August 14th. The police investigated. They were more serious about it than that first officer had been. Detective Sarah Kim was assigned to the case, a 40-something woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She interviewed Cameron's friends and colleagues. She checked their bank accounts and credit cards. She pulled phone records. She did everything you're supposed to do when people vanish. And then, 6 days after they disappeared, Detective Kim called me. Her voice was gentle in a way that made my stomach drop before she even said the words. Mr. Morrison, we found Marcus Chin's body this morning. I'm very sorry. They'd pulled him out of the Willamette River, about 10 miles downstream from the Marquam Bridge. He'd been in the water for several days. The medical examiner determined cause of death was drowning, with injuries consistent with a fall from a significant height. Jumped or fell from the bridge, they said. Maybe both. What about Cameron? I asked, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. We're still searching. But Mr. Morrison, we found a note. In Cameron's handwriting. It was in a waterproof bag attached to Marcus's body. She read me the note over the phone. I don't remember the exact words now. Trauma has a way of blurring the details you don't want to remember, but the gist was that Cameron and Marcus had made a decision together. That the world was too hard for people like them. That they'd faced too much prejudice and hatred. That they'd rather leave together than continue fighting. It was a suicide note. A joint suicide pact. They searched the river for 2 more weeks. They used divers and sonar and dogs along the banks. They found nothing. No body. No trace of my brother. Detective Kim explained that sometimes the river doesn't give up its dead, that bodies can get trapped in debris or swept out to the ocean. She said they'd keep looking, but as the weeks turned into a month, I knew they'd given up hope. Cameron was declared legally dead. We held a funeral with a closed casket because there was no body to bury. I gave that eulogy I mentioned. I cried. I mourned. I felt guilty for every family dinner where I'd stayed silent while Dad made his snide comments. I felt guilty for not calling Cameron that Sunday morning when he didn't call me. I felt guilty for being alive when my little brother had been so desperate, so hopeless, that he'd chosen to die. The grief was crushing. It wasn't the clean kind of grief you see in movies, where people cry beautifully and then slowly heal and eventually smile when they think about happy memories. It was ugly and suffocating and relentless. I couldn't sleep without seeing Cameron's face. Couldn't drive past the Pearl District without thinking about that empty apartment. Couldn't answer my phone on Sunday mornings because the silence where his call should have been was physically painful. Rachel tried to help. She was patient and kind, and everything a spouse should be when your world is falling apart. But there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. Loss has a way of isolating you, even from the people who love you most. Tyler and Emma were confused and sad, asking questions I couldn't answer. Why did Uncle Cameron want to die? Didn't he know we loved him? Could I promise them I'd never leave like that? I threw myself into work because it was the only thing that made sense. Construction is straightforward. You follow the blueprints. You build according to code. You solve problems with math and physics and logic. There's no ambiguity, no unanswerable questions. A wall is either plumb or it isn't. A foundation is either solid or it needs repair. I worked 12, 14, 16-hour days. I took on projects I didn't have time for. I exhausted myself until I was too tired to dream. And slowly, painfully, over 3 years and 2 months and 17 days, I built a life around the hole where Cameron used to be. I learned to function. I learned to smile at my kids and hold my wife and go through the motions of being a normal person. The grief didn't go away. I'm not sure it ever does, but it became something I could carry instead of something that buried me. I visited Cameron's grave every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. The time he used to call. I'd bring coffee and sit on the grass and talk to him about my week, about the kids, about everything I would have told him on the phone. I know he wasn't really there, that I was talking to a headstone and an empty casket, but it helped. It kept him alive in some small way. And then, 3 years and 2 months and 17 days after I'd last heard my brother's voice, my phone buzzed with a notification at 2:47 in the morning. Voicemail from unknown number. I almost deleted it without listening. Unknown numbers at 2:47 a.m. are never good news. They're scams or wrong numbers or but dials. But something made me tap the play button. Instinct, maybe. Or fate. Or just the insomnia that had plagued me since Cameron died, leaving me half awake and scrolling my phone at 3 in the morning instead of sleeping. The voicemail started with static, heavy breathing, then a voice that made my heart stop. Luke. Just my name. Whispered, hoarse, barely audible, but unmistakably, impossibly, my brother's voice. Luke, I don't have much time. He's letting me call you once. Just once. To prove I'm alive. To prove he can do whatever he wants. Luke, I'm not dead. I never jumped. I never wanted to die. He took me. He took both of us. And he killed Marcus. And he's been keeping me in. The message cut off. Ended mid-sentence like someone had grabbed the phone away. I sat there in my bed, in the dark, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the silence after the message ended. Rachel was asleep beside me, breathing softly. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly as it had been 5 minutes ago. Except my dead brother had just left me a voicemail. I played it again, and again, and again. 5 times, 10 times, 20 times. Each time I told myself I was wrong, that it was a sick prank or a coincidence or my grief-broken brain hearing what it wanted to hear. But it was Cameron's voice. I knew my brother's voice the way I knew my own. The slight rasp from years of talking over noisy classrooms. The way he said my name, with the emphasis on the second syllable. Luke. Not Luke or Luke, but Luke, like a sigh and a question at the same time. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. I called the number back. It rang once, then an automated message. The number you have dialed is not in service. I pulled up my call history. The voicemail had come from a 503 number, Portland area code, but when I tried to call it, nothing. Like the number had existed just long enough to deliver that message and then vanished. Rachel stirred beside me. Luke? What's wrong? It's 3 in the morning. I got a voicemail, I said, my voice sounding strange, disconnected. From Cameron. She sat up, instantly awake with that mother's instinct that detects danger even from sleep. What? Luke, that's not possible. Cameron is. I know what Cameron is. Was. Whatever. But I just listened to a voicemail from him. From his voice. Rachel, he said he's alive. He said someone took him. He said Marcus was killed, and he's been kept somewhere for 3 years. I watched her face cycle through emotions. Concern, confusion, pity. The kind of pity you give someone who's clearly having a breakdown. Honey, let me listen to it. I played the voicemail for her. Watched her face as she listened to my dead brother's voice whispering desperately through the phone speaker. When it ended, she was quiet for a long moment. It does sound like him, she admitted. But Luke, couldn't this be someone who sounds similar? Or an AI voice clone? I've read articles about how easy it is to fake voices now. Someone could be messing with you. Some sick person who knows about Cameron's death. Why would someone do that? I don't know. But the alternative is that Cameron has been alive for 3 years and someone's been holding him prisoner, and that seems impossible. I finished. Yeah, I know. But what if it's real? What if that was actually him? Rachel took my hand. Then we call the police. Right now? We report this and let them investigate. I pulled up Detective Kim's number. She'd given it to me 3 years ago, told me to call if I ever needed anything. I'd called her a few times in those first few months, desperate for updates, for any information. She'd always been kind but firm. The case was closed. Cameron was dead. There was nothing more to investigate. I called her at 3:15 a.m. She answered on the fourth ring, voice groggy. Detective Kim, this is Luke Morrison, Cameron Morrison's brother. I'm sorry to call so late, but I just got a voicemail from Cameron saying he's alive. There was a long pause. I could hear her sitting up, becoming alert. Mr. Morrison, what exactly did this voicemail say? I played it for her over the phone. Let her hear my brother's desperate whisper. When it ended, she was quiet for several seconds. Mr. Morrison, I need you to send me that voicemail file immediately. And I need you to not call that number back, not try to trace it, not do anything until I've had a chance to analyze this. Can you do that? Do you think it's real? I think it needs to be investigated. But Mr. Morrison, I also need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that this is a hoax. We see this sometimes with high-profile cases. People who get off on causing pain to grieving families. Voice cloning technology is sophisticated enough now that I know my brother's voice. I'm sure you do. But our minds can play tricks on us when we want something badly enough. Send me the file. I'll have our tech people analyze it, and I'll call you first thing in the morning. Try to get some sleep. Sleep. Right. Like I was going to sleep after hearing my dead brother's voice begging for help. I sent her the voicemail, and then I did exactly what she'd told me not to do. I started investigating. I pulled out my laptop and started searching for everything I could find about Cameron's death 3 years ago. News articles, police reports, anything public record. The official story was straightforward. Cameron Morrison and Marcus Chun, both respected members of Portland's LGBTQ community, had taken their own lives by jumping from the Marquam Bridge. A suicide note had been found with Marcus's body. Cameron's body had never been recovered, but the evidence all pointed to the same conclusion. A tragic double suicide. But what if that evidence had been manufactured? What if someone had faked the note, staged the scene, killed Marcus, and made it look like suicide while taking Cameron alive? I thought about the voicemail. He took both of us, and he killed Marcus. And he's been keeping me in. He. Singular. One person. Someone who'd taken both of them, killed Marcus, and kept Cameron prisoner for 3 years. But who? And why? I started making a list. Who would want to hurt Cameron? Who had motive? Our father was the obvious first answer. Richard Morrison had never accepted Cameron's sexuality. He'd made that clear at every family gathering. But kidnapping his own son? Keeping him prisoner for 3 years? That seemed extreme even for Dad's level of bigotry. But I couldn't rule it out. I wrote down Dad's name. Who else? Cameron was a teacher. Had he had conflicts with students or parents? I tried to remember if he'd ever mentioned problems at work. There had been one incident, maybe 2 years before he disappeared, where a parent had complained about Cameron assigning books with LGBTQ themes. The parent had accused him of pushing an agenda, but that had been resolved through the school administration. Would someone really kidnap a teacher over book selection? I wrote down, parent conflict, school issue, Marcus's family. I didn't know them well. They'd been at the funeral, devastated, grieving. Could one of them have blamed Cameron for Marcus's death somehow? If they believed Cameron had convinced Marcus to commit suicide, could they have decided to punish him by keeping him alive and suffering? It sounded crazy. All of it sounded crazy. But someone had called me from my brother's voice at 3 in the morning, and that voice had said things that couldn't be explained away as coincidence. Rachel came downstairs around 4 a.m. and found me surrounded by papers and laptop screens, scribbling notes like a man possessed. Luke, you need to sleep. I can't. Not until I figure this out. Not until I know if Cameron is really out there somewhere. The police are going to investigate. Detective Kim said she'd call in the morning. The police had 3 years to investigate. They closed the case. They declared him dead. If he's been alive this whole time, that means they missed something. That means I need to find it myself. Rachel sat down across from me. Okay, if you're doing this, I'm helping. What do we know? I loved her so much in that moment. She could have insisted I was losing my mind. Could have called my psychiatrist or my mother or someone to talk sense into me. Instead, she grabbed a notepad and started taking notes. We know that voicemail came from a 503 number that's now disconnected, I said. We know Cameron said he took him. Singular. One person. We know Marcus was killed and Cameron was kept somewhere. We know it's been 3 years. So we're looking for someone who had access to Cameron and Marcus 3 years ago, who had the means to abduct them both, who had a reason to kill Marcus but keep Cameron alive. I nodded. And we're looking for a place. Cameron said he's been keeping me in, before the message cut off. Keeping him in what? A house? A building? Somewhere isolated enough that Cameron couldn't escape or call for help for 3 years. Rachel pulled up a map of Portland on her laptop. Think about it logistically. If someone grabbed them from their apartment in the Pearl District, they'd need a vehicle large enough to transport 2 adult men. And they'd need to do it without neighbors noticing. Sunday morning, August 14th, 3 years ago. I tried to remember what I knew about that day. Cameron and Marcus had been having coffee. The coffee maker was still on when I found their apartment the next day. So whatever happened, it happened in the morning. Probably early, before the building got busy with people coming and going. Their building has security cameras, I said suddenly. In the lobby and parking garage. Did the police ever check those? They must have. But what were they looking for? They were investigating a suicide, not an abduction. They would have been looking for footage of Cameron and Marcus leaving voluntarily, not footage of someone taking them. Rachel grabbed her phone. I'm calling Detective Kim back. It's 4:30 in the morning. I don't care. If there's security footage that was overlooked 3 years ago because everyone was investigating the wrong crime, we need to see it now. While Rachel called Detective Kim, I kept digging through old news articles. Most of them covered the basic facts. Beloved teacher and partner die in apparent suicide. Community mourns. Memorial service planned. But one article, from a small LGBTQ news site, had a detail I'd forgotten about. Cameron Morrison had recently spoken out against a controversial religious organization that operated conversion therapy camps in rural Oregon. Morrison had been working with state legislators to ban the practice, calling it torture disguised as treatment. Friends say he received threats for his activism, though he refused to let hate silence him. Conversion therapy camps. Cameron had been fighting against them. Had he made enemies? Had someone from one of those organizations decided to silence him permanently? Or worse, had someone decided to take him to one of those camps? I felt sick. The idea of Cameron, my gentle, kind brother, being held in some conversion therapy nightmare for 3 years. I couldn't finish the thought. Rachel hung up with Detective Kim. She's meeting us at the police station at 6 a.m. She's going to pull all the original evidence from Cameron's case, including security footage from the building. Luke, she said something else. 3 other men have been reported missing in Portland over the past 5 years. All gay men. All roughly Cameron's age. None of their cases have been solved. 3 other men. A pattern. This wasn't random. This wasn't personal vendetta against just Cameron. This was something bigger. What if there are more? I said, what if Cameron isn't the only one being held somewhere? What if whoever took him has been doing this for years? The room felt too small suddenly. The scope of what we might be dealing with, not just my brother's kidnapping, but a serial abductor targeting gay men in Portland, was overwhelming. At 6 a.m. sharp, Rachel and I walked into the Portland Police Bureau's Central Precinct. Detective Kim was waiting for us in a conference room, looking like she'd gotten about as much sleep as I had. Which is to say, none. I had our tech unit analyze the voicemail, she said without preamble. It's not AI generated. It's a real human voice. And the voice pattern is a 94% match for Cameron Morrison's voice print from recordings we had on file. Which means either that really is your brother, or someone who sounds remarkably like him. So what now? Rachel asked. Now we investigate this as if Cameron Morrison is alive and being held against his will. Which means I need you to tell me everything about Cameron's life 3 years ago. Every detail, no matter how small. People he knew, places he went, conflicts he might have had. I need to build a profile of potential suspects. I told her about the conversion therapy activism, about the parent who'd complained about his book selections, about our father's disapproval, about Marcus's family, everything I could think of. Detective Kim took notes, asked follow-up questions, and then pulled up security footage on her laptop. This is from Cameron and Marcus's building. Sunday morning, August 14th, 3 years ago. The footage showed the building lobby, grainy, and black and white. Timestamp showed 7:23 a.m. The lobby was empty for several minutes. Then a figure entered from the parking garage. Male, average height, wearing a baseball cap pulled low and a medical face mask, which wasn't unusual in 2021 when people were still being careful about COVID. The figure walked to the elevators like he belonged there. Pressed the button. Waited. Got on the elevator. Now watch this, Detective Kim said, fast-forwarding the footage. At 8:47 a.m., the elevator doors opened. The same figure emerged, but now he wasn't alone. He was pushing a cleaning cart, the industrial kind maintenance workers use. Large enough to hold supplies. Large enough to hold a person. He pushed the cart across the lobby, moving casually, like he did this every day. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. He disappeared into the parking garage. Now look at this, Detective Kim said. She pulled up parking garage footage. Same timestamp. The figure with the cleaning cart emerged from the elevator and pushed it to a white panel van. He opened the back doors, lifted something large and heavy out of the cart, something covered with a tarp, and loaded it into the van. Then he did it again. Two large, heavy objects covered with tarps. Then he got in the van and drove away. We have a partial plate, Detective Kim said, but it's obscured. We're working on enhancing it. That's Cameron and Marcus, I said, my voice hollow. In that cart. Under those tarps. Most likely. Which means whoever this is, he planned it. He had access to the building, knew when to come, had the right equipment. This wasn't impulsive. This was carefully orchestrated. Can you see his face anywhere? No. He kept the hat and mask on the entire time. Knew where the cameras were. Avoided them when possible. I stared at the figure on the screen. This person had taken my brother. Had killed Marcus. Had kept Cameron prisoner for 3 years. And he'd done it in broad daylight, in a secure building, without anyone noticing. What about the van? Rachel asked. Can you trace it? We're working on it. White panel vans are common, but combined with the partial plate and the timeline, we should be able to narrow it down. Over the next several hours, Detective Kim and her team worked the case with an intensity one hadn't seen 3 years ago when they'd been investigating a suicide. Because now it wasn't a closed case. Now it was an active kidnapping, possibly connected to other missing persons cases, possibly part of a larger pattern. They identified the van. It belonged to a cleaning company called Cascade Maintenance Services. The company checked out, legitimate business, proper licenses. But when Detective Kim called to ask about employees who might have had access to that van 3 years ago, she hit a wall. The owner says the van was stolen 2 days before Cameron disappeared, she told me. Reported to police, never recovered. It turned up 6 months later, abandoned in a parking lot in Gresham. We're pulling the report now. So whoever did this stole a van, used it to abduct Cameron and Marcus, then ditched it. Exactly. Which tells us this person is sophisticated. They're planning ahead, covering their tracks. What about the conversion therapy angle? I asked. Cameron was working to ban those camps. Do we have a list of organizations he was targeting? Detective Kim pulled up a file. According to Cameron's emails with the state legislator he was working with, there were 3 main organizations running these camps in rural Oregon. 2 of them shut down about 2 years ago after the state increased scrutiny. But one is still operating. She turned her laptop screen toward me. Restoration Ministries. They run a facility about 90 miles east of Portland, in the mountains. They call it a faith-based healing retreat, but it's conversion therapy. Cameron was specifically focused on shutting them down because they were the largest and had the most complaints from former attendees. I looked at the website. It showed peaceful images of cabins in the woods, smiling people hiking trails, Bible verses about redemption and healing. It looked benign. It looked like a normal Christian retreat center. But reading the testimonials from former attendees told a different story. People describing psychological torture, forced isolation, being told their identities were demonic, being held against their will under the guise of helping them. Who runs it? I asked. Director is a man named Pastor Thomas Whitmore. He's been running Restoration Ministries for about 8 years. Before that, he was a youth pastor at a megachurch in suburban Portland. Got forced out after allegations that he was too aggressive in his counseling methods with LGBTQ teens. She pulled up a photo. Pastor Thomas Whitmore was in his late 40s, with the kind of face that looked friendly and trustworthy. Warm eyes, genuine smile. The kind of person you'd trust to help you, to care for you. The kind of person who could convince families to send their gay children to his camp for fixing. I want to visit this place, I said. Absolutely not, Detective Kim said firmly. If Whitmore is involved in this, if he's holding your brother at that facility, you showing up will tip him off. We need to be strategic about this. So what's the plan? We get a warrant to search the facility. But to get a warrant, we need probable cause. Right now, all we have is a voicemail and some security footage showing an abduction. We need to connect it to Whitmore and Restoration Ministries. How long will that take? I don't know. Could be days. Could be weeks. I stood up, shaking my head. Cameron doesn't have weeks. He's been held for 3 years. Every day we waste is another day he's suffering. Mr. Morrison, I understand your urgency. No, you don't, I interrupted. That's my little brother. He called me for help. He said he was running out of time. I'm not going to sit around waiting for paperwork while he's out there. Rachel put her hand on my arm. Luke, think about this. If you go charging in there and Whitmore is holding Cameron, what do you think happens? You think he just hands him over? Or does he panic and do something that puts Cameron in even more danger? She was right. I knew she was right. But every cell in my body was screaming at me to do something, to act, to save my brother now instead of following proper procedure. Detective Kim's phone rang. She answered it, listened for a moment, then her expression changed. Send me the address. We're on our way. She hung up and looked at me. That was one of my colleagues working the other missing persons cases. One of the men who disappeared 2 years ago, Darren Walsh. His credit card was just used at a gas station in government camp. That's about 60 miles east of here, near the Restoration Ministries facility, I said. Exactly. Could be nothing. Could be someone who stole the card. Or it could be that whoever's holding these men is getting sloppy. We drove to government camp, a small mountain town that serves as a base for MT Hood recreation. The gas station was a typical convenience store with a few pumps and a small attached deli. Detective Kim showed the clerk a photo of Darren Walsh. You seen this man? The clerk, a teenager with bored eyes, barely glanced at the photo. No. His credit card was used here about an hour ago. Check your security cameras. The clerk sighed and pulled up the footage. We watched a figure in a heavy jacket and hat approach the register, buy gas and some supplies. The face was partially obscured, but the build and height matched Darren Walsh. That's him, Detective Kim said. That's Darren Walsh. Or someone using his card who looks similar, I pointed out. Either way, it's a lead. We checked with other businesses in the small town. And it's less than 15 miles from Restoration Ministries, Detective Kim added. We drove toward the facility. The address put it on a rural road deep in national forest land. The website had shown quaint cabins and hiking trails, but as we got closer, I realized the photos had been carefully curated. This wasn't a picturesque retreat center. This was miles and miles of dense forest with a single gravel road leading to a fenced compound. We can't just drive in there, Detective Kim said, parking about a mile from the entrance. Not without a warrant. So what do? We watch. We document. We gather evidence that will get us that warrant. For the next 6 hours, we sat in Detective Kim's unmarked car, watching the road. A few vehicles came and went, staff members, presumably. Around 4 p.m., a white panel van drove past us toward the facility. Not the same one from the security footage 3 years ago, but similar. At 7 p.m., as the sun was starting to set, Rachel pointed. Look, a figure was walking along the fence line, about 200 yards from where the main buildings were visible. Even from a distance, even in the fading light, I could see that the figure was thin, almost skeletal. They were moving slowly, like walking was difficult. Detective Kim pulled out binoculars, focused on the figure. Then she handed them to me without a word. Through the lenses, I could see him clearly. Gaunt, pale, with long, unkempt hair. Wearing simple gray clothes that hung off his frame. But the face, even after 3 years of hell, was unmistakable. Cameron, my brother, was alive. Was walking along that fence line. Was less than 200 yards from where I sat. That's him, I whispered. That's Cameron. Detective Kim took the binoculars back, looked again, then immediately got on her phone. This is Detective Kim, badge number 4729. I need tactical units and a warrant for an emergency wellness check at Restoration Ministries, approximately mile marker 12 on Forest Service Road 2840. I have visual confirmation of a possible kidnapping victim on the property. I need units here now. While she coordinated with dispatch, I watched my brother through the binoculars. He was still walking along the fence, moving slowly. Then another figure appeared, taller, broader, clearly an authority figure. This person grabbed Cameron's arm, roughly, and started pulling him back toward the buildings. I was out of the car before I consciously decided to move. "Mr. Morrison, stop!" Detective Kim called after me. I didn't stop. I ran toward the fence, toward where I'd seen Cameron. The fence was 8 feet tall, chain link with barbed wire on top. I grabbed it, started trying to climb. "Cameron!" I shouted. "Cameron, it's Luke. I'm here. I found you." Hands grabbed me from behind. Detective Kim and Rachel, pulling me back down. "You're going to get him killed," Detective Kim hissed. "If they know we're here, if Whitmore panics." An alarm started blaring from inside the compound. Lights came on, flooding the grounds. "We've been spotted. Get back to the car," Detective Kim ordered. "Now." We ran back to the car just as 2 men emerged from the compound gates. One of them was carrying a rifle. "You're trespassing on private property," one of them shouted. "This is a private religious facility. You have no right to be here." Detective Kim held up her badge. "I'm Detective Sarah Kim with Portland Police. I have reason to believe you're holding people against their will on this property. I've called for backup. They'll be here in 15 minutes with a warrant. You can't just come onto church property and make accusations. I can when I have visual confirmation of a kidnapping victim. Now you have 2 choices. You can let us in peacefully to conduct a wellness check, or you can wait for tactical units to force their way in. Either way, we're getting onto this property tonight." The men exchanged glances. Then one of them pulled out a phone, made a call, spoke quietly for a moment, hung up. "Pastor Whitmore says you can come in. But only you, detective. No civilians. And he wants your warrant before we show you anything. The warrant is en route. And these people are witnesses to a possible crime. They're coming with me." The standoff continued for another 5 minutes until we heard sirens approaching. Multiple police units, coming fast. The tactical team Detective Kim had called for. Within 20 minutes, the compound was surrounded. The gates were opened, peacefully, without resistance. And we walked into what I can only describe as a nightmare disguised as a religious retreat. The main building looked normal enough. A large lodge-style structure with a central common area, offices, what looked like a chapel. But Pastor Whitmore led us past all of that, down a staircase, into a basement level that wasn't visible from outside. The basement was divided into small rooms. Cells, really. 8 of them, each with a narrow bed, a small sink, a toilet. No windows. Locks on the outside of the doors. "These are our intensive treatment rooms," Pastor Whitmore explained, his voice still calm and pleasant despite the police surrounding him. "For residents who need extra support during their healing journey. Open them," Detective Kim ordered. "All of them." Pastor Whitmore pulled out a ring of keys, started unlocking doors. The first room held a young man I didn't recognize. Maybe early 20s. He blinked in the sudden light, looking terrified. The second room was empty. The third room held Cameron. He was sitting on the narrow bed, his back against the wall. When the door opened and he saw me standing there, his eyes went wide. For a moment, he just stared, like he couldn't believe I was real. "Luke," his voice was hoarse, broken. "You actually came." I crossed the room in 2 steps and pulled him into my arms. He was so thin I could feel every bone. He smelled like industrial soap and fear and 3 years of captivity. "I'm here," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry it took me so long. I thought you were dead. I thought." "I know," he whispered. "I know what you thought." That's what he wanted everyone to think. Detective Kim was methodically opening the other rooms. In total, they found 5 men in those cells. 5 men who'd been reported missing over the past 5 years. 5 families who'd been told their sons were dead or had run away or simply vanished. All of them gay. All of them young. All of them imprisoned under the guise of conversion therapy. Pastor Whitmore was still trying to maintain his pleasant demeanor. "These men came here voluntarily for spiritual healing. Their families requested our services. We have signed consent forms." "Signed under duress doesn't count as consent," Detective Kim said. "And we both know these men didn't come here voluntarily." She handcuffed Whitmore herself. Read him his rights while I held my brother and tried to process the fact that he was real. He was alive. He was here in my arms instead of dead in the river where I'd believed he'd been for 3 years. The other men were being brought out, given medical attention, reunited with police officers who'd been calling their families. The tactical team was searching the rest of the compound, finding evidence of years of abuse disguised as therapy. But all I could focus on was Cameron, my brother, who I'd mourned and buried and carried guilt over for 3 years, who'd been alive this whole time, suffering in a cell while I'd moved on with my life. Marcus, Cameron said suddenly, pulling back to look at me. Is Marcus, did they find? I didn't want to tell him. Didn't want to break his heart all over again. But he deserved the truth. Marcus didn't make it, I said gently. They found his body in the river 3 years ago. I'm sorry, Cam. I'm so sorry. Cameron's face crumpled. He'd known, probably. Had suspected. But hearing it confirmed was different. Whitmore threw him off the bridge, Cameron said, his voice barely a whisper. Marcus fought back when they were taking us. Tried to protect me. So Whitmore, he made me watch. Made me watch him throw Marcus over the edge. And then he told me that's what would happen to everyone I loved if I didn't cooperate. If I didn't participate in his program. If I didn't pretend to be getting better. I held him while he cried. While paramedics checked his vital signs and declared him severely malnourished and dehydrated but stable. While Detective Kim documented everything for the inevitable trial that would put Pastor Thomas Whitmore away for the rest of his life. The other men who'd been held in those cells were being loaded into ambulances. Cameron refused to get in one until he'd told me everything, until he'd explained the 3 years I'd missed. He kept us isolated, Cameron said as we sat in the back of an ambulance while a paramedic checked his blood pressure. Each of us in our own cell. We could hear each other sometimes, through the vents. That's how we knew we weren't alone. But we never saw each other. Never talked. Just existed. He'd bring food twice a day. Would make us pray. Would tell us we were sick and he was helping us. That our families had given up on us. That the world thought we were dead and no one was looking for us. I was looking, I said. I never stopped looking. Not really. I believed the wrong story. The suicide note, Cameron said. That was Whitmore. He forged it. Made it look like Marcus and I had jumped together. He told me he'd mailed it to the police, that everyone thought we were dead, that even if I escaped, no one would believe me. I'd been declared dead. I had no identity anymore. He'd erased me. But you called me. Last night. How? Cameron almost smiled. One of his staff members. Young guy, maybe 25. He was having doubts about the program. About what Whitmore was doing. He snuck me his phone for 5 minutes. Told me I could make one call. I called you because I knew. I knew if anyone would believe me, if anyone would come looking, it would be you. I almost didn't believe it, I admit it. I almost convinced myself it was a prank. But I couldn't ignore your voice. I could not follow the lead. Thank God you did. The investigation into Restoration Ministries would take months. They'd find evidence of dozens of men who'd passed through the program over the years. Some had been released after their families paid enough money. Some had escaped. And some, like the 5 men found in those cells, had simply been kept indefinitely because Whitmore decided they needed more intensive treatment. Marcus's murder would be one of many charges against Pastor Thomas Whitmore. The list was staggering. Kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, murder, assault, fraud, forgery. He'd face multiple life sentences. But that night, as I drove my brother, my alive, breathing, impossible brother, to the hospital for a full medical evaluation, I didn't think about the trial or the charges or the years of legal proceedings ahead. I just thought about Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. About phone calls I'd get to have again. About having my brother back from the dead. Cameron slept for most of the drive, exhausted, medicated, finally safe. Rachel kept glancing back at him from the front seat, tears running down her face, still trying to process that the brother-in-law we'd buried 3 years ago was alive in our back seat. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up, she whispered. That this is a dream. If it's a dream, I don't want to wake up, I said. At the hospital, they admitted Cameron for observation. Severe malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, muscle atrophy from 3 years of minimal movement. Psychological trauma that would take years of therapy to address. But alive, breathing, real. Tyler and Emma came to visit the next morning. I tried to prepare them, tried to explain that Uncle Cameron wasn't dead after all, that he'd been taken by a bad person, but now he was safe. But how do you prepare children for resurrection? How do you explain to a 12-year-old that sometimes people come back from the dead? Tyler stood in the doorway of Cameron's hospital room, staring like he was seeing a ghost. Uncle Cameron? His voice was small, uncertain. Cameron opened his eyes, saw his nephew, and smiled. Really smiled, for the first time since we'd found him. "Hey, Tyler. I heard you made the baseball team. First base, right?" Tyler burst into tears and ran to the bed. Emma followed, less certain but desperate for connection. And I watched my brother, my exhausted, traumatized, impossibly alive brother, hug my children and tell them he'd missed them. "How did you know about baseball?" Tyler asked through his tears. "Your dad," Cameron said, looking at me. "He used to come to my grave every Sunday morning and talk to me. Tell me about your games and Emma's dance recitals and everything happening in your lives." I couldn't hear him, obviously, but I like to think some part of me knew he was there, that he never stopped talking to me. I had to leave the room, had to step into the hallway where I could break down without an audience. Rachel found me there, pressed against the wall, sobbing like I hadn't let myself sob in 3 years. "He's alive," I kept saying. "He's actually alive." "I know," she said, holding me. "I know." Over the next few weeks, as Cameron slowly regained strength and started trauma therapy, the full scope of what he'd endured came out in pieces. The psychological torture disguised as prayer. The isolation designed to break his sense of self. The constant messaging that he was sick, broken, demonic. The way Whitmore had used Marcus's death as a threat. Behave, or everyone you love dies like he did. And through it all, Cameron had held on to hope. Had drawn strength from believing that somewhere, I was still his brother. That even if the world thought he was dead, Luke Morrison hadn't forgotten him. That eventually, somehow, I'd figure it out. The staff member who'd given Cameron the phone to call me came forward voluntarily, testified against Whitmore, explained that he'd been raised in the church, had believed in the program, but had gradually realized they were torturing people under the guise of helping them. Giving Cameron that phone had been his act of rebellion, his way of bringing down the system from the inside. The trial became national news. Conversion therapy was already controversial, but this case brought new attention to the dangers of unregulated religious programs. States across the country started passing laws to ban the practice. Cameron testified, calm and clear-eyed, describing exactly what had been done to him. Watching him on the stand, telling his story to a packed courtroom, I felt a complicated mix of pride and rage. Pride that he was strong enough to face Whitmore, to tell his truth. Rage that he'd had to develop that strength through 3 years of hell. Whitmore was sentenced to 8 consecutive life terms. He'll die in prison. The other staff members at Restoration Ministries faced various charges. Some claimed they didn't know what was really happening in the basement. Some admitted they'd had suspicions, but were too afraid to act. The property was seized and eventually demolished. The basement cells where my brother and 4 other men had been held were photographed extensively for evidence, then destroyed. I'm glad. I couldn't stand the thought of those rooms continuing to exist in the world. Cameron moved in with Rachel and me while he recovered. Our guest room became his room. Sunday mornings at 9 a.m., we'd sit together with coffee, real coffee, not the terrible instant stuff he'd been given at the facility, and talk. Sometimes about what happened, sometimes about the future, sometimes about nothing at all, just enjoying the miracle of being together. Tyler and Emma adjusted to having their uncle back from the dead with the resilience of children. They asked questions we sometimes couldn't answer. They had nightmares sometimes. But mostly they were just happy. Happy to have family movie nights with Uncle Cameron. Happy to show him their rooms and their toys and everything that had changed in 3 years. Rachel was endlessly patient, making space in our life for Cameron's recovery, for his trauma responses, for the complicated process of learning to be a person again after 3 years of being treated as a project to be fixed. And me? I struggled with guilt. With the 3 years I'd spent believing a lie while Cameron suffered. With the knowledge that if that staff member hadn't given Cameron a phone, if Cameron hadn't made that call, if I hadn't answered it, my brother would still be in that cell right now. "You can't think like that," Cameron told me one Sunday morning, 6 months after we'd found him. "You can't torture yourself with what-ifs. You came for me. When I called, you answered. You believed me when everyone else would have thought it was a cruel prank. You didn't stop until you found me. Luke, you saved my life. I should have saved it 3 years ago. I should have questioned the suicide story. Should have demanded to see your body. Should have investigated deeper." "Stop," he said firmly. "You were grieving. You were told by police and medical examiners and everyone else that Marcus and I had jumped. Why would you question that? What would have made you think to look for an elaborate kidnapping disguised as a suicide? The note. I never verified the handwriting. Neither did the police. Neither did anyone. Whitmore's forgery was good. This isn't your fault, Luke. It's his fault. Only his. I wanted to believe him. Some days I could. Other days the guilt was crushing. But we moved forward because that's what survivors do. Cameron started teaching again, part-time at first, working with an alternative school that specialized in helping at-risk LGBTQ youth. His students didn't know his story at first, just knew that Mr. Morrison really understood what it felt like to be different, to be rejected, to struggle. Eventually, Cameron went public with his story, did interviews, wrote an op-ed for the New York Times about conversion therapy and the danger of letting religious organizations operate without oversight. He became an advocate, turning his trauma into activism, helping other survivors find their voices. And on Sundays at 9 a.m., without fail, my phone rings. Not because Cameron is calling me. He lives in our guest room, after all, but because we set an alarm. A reminder. A memorial to the ritual we lost and found again. We sit together with coffee and talk about everything and nothing. And I'm grateful. So deeply, impossibly grateful that my brother came back from the dead. That a voicemail at 2:47 in the morning turned out to be real instead of a grief-induced hallucination. That Cameron had the courage to call when given the chance. That I had the stubbornness to believe when everyone told me I was wrong. This story doesn't have a neat, happy ending. Cameron still has nightmares. Still struggles with crowds and enclosed spaces and authority figures who remind him of Whitmore. Still grieves Marcus, who didn't get to come back from the dead. Recovery isn't linear. Trauma doesn't heal on a convenient timeline. But he's alive. That's what matters. Against all odds, against a system designed to erase him, against 3 years in a cell that was supposed to break him, Cameron survived. And when I think about how close we came to never finding him, if that staff member hadn't helped, if Cameron had called someone else who didn't answer, if I dismissed the voicemail as a prank, I'm reminded of how fragile truth is. How easily people can be disappeared, declared dead, erased from existence. So I'm telling you this story for a reason. I'm telling you that sometimes the impossible is real. Sometimes the voice on the phone really is your dead brother calling for help. Sometimes the official story is a lie. Sometimes you have to trust your gut, even when everyone tells you you're wrong. And if you ever get that call, the one that seems impossible, the one that challenges everything you believe about reality, answer it. Believe it. Chase it down no matter how crazy it makes you look. Because somewhere, someone might be waiting in a cell, counting on you to hear them through the static and the doubt and the 3 years of being told they're dead. Answer the call. Save the life. Bring them home. That's what I learned from a voicemail at 2:47 in the morning that changed everything I thought I knew about loss and hope, and the stubborn refusal of love to accept death as final. Cameron is alive. And every Sunday at 9 a.m., I get to hear his voice. That's my miracle. Don't miss yours.